Hi, my name is Senthujan Senkaiahliyan, and I'll be hosting today's podcast on AI Times Journal's podcast. Today, we're going to be talking to Spiros Margaris, one of the biggest fintech influencers in the scene right now. Spiros is a venture capitalist and senior advisor for many tech companies and has presented at numerous conferences around the world, most notably being the first non-IBM keynote speaker at the biggest IBM event in Europe. Today, we'll be talking about the basic understandings of fintech for our viewers and delve into some more interesting and emerging topics within the field. Thank you for being here today, Spiros.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Perfect. So let's just dive right into it. So from your knowledge, I want you to explain what you think and how you define what fintech is.
It's a good question. Basically, it's a broad field. I believe, I tell most people it's, as it says, financial technology. That's what fintech is. It's basically technology that enables companies, startups to provide financial services through technology. Sometimes with a better user experience, sometimes with better technology. But the field is so broad. We talk about the challenger bank, sometimes the B2B service provider that basically has nothing to do directly with customers. But basically, the fintech industry aims to enable companies to provide better solutions, financial solutions, and the benefit of all of this are the consumers, directly or indirectly through the financial service provider. Perfect. But it's a big space. Fintech existed before the expression fintech existed. But when fintech was defined as such, it became a brand and it helped the whole industry grow.
And how do you find fintech is transforming the world in the modern age?
I think that fintech provides cheaper, better solutions. It helps a lot of less privileged people to have banking services, for instance. As I said before, it's very broad, but I think the most important part of fintech will be helping the less privileged people to have banking services which they can afford and which serve a purpose. It's like when I say serve a purpose, for people who are unbanked or underbanked, fintech allows them to have access to financial services, banking services, and that's a huge enabler in their lives. I always tell people, and I have to stress it here as well, is the legacy of fintech will be one day that we help the less privileged people or the unbanked people to have a better life.
Amazing. And due to fintech's deep-rooted nature in digital technology, what do you believe the role of AI is to come to play in the development of fintech in the years to come?
It's already now here, not only for fintech, for all companies that, if you want to scale a company and with all the data, with all the digital footprint we give, from fraud detection to protect the company against cyber attacks, or to provide the personalized services. I think without AI, machine learning would not be possible. AI will play a role everywhere. But sometimes it's overhyped, but nevertheless, we're on the road to a world that AI, machine learning, will augment our lives, our work, and hopefully free us up from doing things that are maybe a little more boring. And if you want to scale data, it's not possible. The whole process, it would be extremely expensive and not feasible to have systems in place to go through all this data and come to conclusions. But again, I think it's a little bit overhyped, but every cool stuff is a little bit overhyped. That's beyond fintech. That's excitement. If it's a fashion brand or another brand, that's just part of the success story. And I think AI went through different AI winters, and I think we're in a good stage now. But I think there will be more exciting things to come.
That's amazing. I agree with you. Everything AI has become the new buzzword. It's the new cool thing. It's become ubiquitous with everything in our society. So I'm looking to see the role that AI does play in fintech as it evolves and gets more deeply seated in.
But I mean, fintech players use AI tremendously. It would not be possible to do their job they do with fewer people and all this data and to scale it. But I think we still picked up the low-hanging fruits.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I want to go back to your thought, to your comment on making the rise of fintech being the primary goal is to make financial services more accessible to consumers. We see a rise of fintech in Southeast Asia and South Asia. And I want to hear your thoughts and opinions. Do you think because of the accessibility of fintech, that is what makes it so widely attractive to consumers in Asia because of its cheap financial services?
And also the personalization, both, I mean, I guess for somebody who hasn't had anything, simple banking services, simple credit card, solutions, it's already a great thing, and if you're a little more sophisticated in terms of like a little more spoiled, then you would like to have something more personalized. Again, like sneakers, you buy normal sneakers, you want personalized sneakers. But Asia in general is extremely advanced, as we know, the super apps, etc. And I think each continent, for some reason, in some ways, inspires. It's like competition. It's like if you look at each country or continent as a startup, I think they get inspired. They have different. How shall I say? Not condition, a different environment. I mean, like South America, where Nubank grew tremendously because people were not banked or underbanked. With a lot of poor people, there's more opportunities for fintech, obviously, which is a good thing that we can help them. In very rich countries, for instance, like where I am, Switzerland, you will not have the same amount of opportunities in the fintech space because people are not looking for the best deal as much as in other countries. But Asia, going back to Asia, China, etc., I mean, in some ways they were so ahead of us, of what they offered. As I said, the super apps within the apps. But different countries, different culture. I think it's very difficult to take one solution and make it work everywhere, because it's also a cultural thing.
That's good to know. All right, and as you said, because just how you just mentioned right now, there's so many opportunities in Asia. There's so many different varieties and options. I want to hear, what would you give advice for aspiring entrepreneurs? Because we can see there's lots of people in the Asian market very hungry to start up their own fintech startups to capitalize on this market. So what advice would you give those aspiring entrepreneurs?
That's $1 million question. I think like most, when you look at some successful startups in Europe, everywhere, it all started from your personal need. You couldn't get like Wise, they found it difficult to wire money or too expensive. So they found a different way. I think they have to go inside themselves and look, say, hey, what would I like to have, which I don't have? Which makes it also a little more difficult at the beginning, because if it's too new, some people, if the solution is easily understandable or understood, then maybe a lot of competitors already have done it. So it's very hard to really make something new.
Okay.
But I think there will be always, with newer technologies at hand, AI, machine learning, and it's not even about technology, it's about finding a true niche, that still has huge potential. It's in the old days, it was difficult to explain what fintech was. But the competition there were fewer competitors. Now everyone knows kind of what fintech is, and a huge amount of competitors. So in the end, you have to go with your heart, with your expertise, and not to give up. But it's also a question of timing. You can have a great idea, but the timing is wrong. But the longer you survive, I tell everyone of my startups, the more likely you will succeed, because eventually the opportunity might come and then you're around. So there's no magic bullet, but I mean, I think in each business case, there's opportunities. But if everyone is already in that space you want to go, it's going to be very hard to succeed unless you really, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think the real entrepreneurs, they will, if they have passion, they invest a lot of the time, indirectly money. I think they're smart enough to figure out if the business has potential. And if you find traction in your idea, you find traction once you have launched it, that's a good sign that maybe there's a huge business opportunity out there. But you have to be a little bit crazy, a little bit naive, because if you're too rational, you can't do it.
Basically,
it's like everything. Do you think we all dream to be Michael Jordans or whatever you want to be, but the very few will achieve it. Right. And if you look at Jeff Bezos, when he started in a small office that was probably very small, probably even himself, if he's honest, he hasn't envisioned that what will happen with Amazon. But you grow with your business if you're successful.
Perfect. And so for entrepreneurs or even early learners who want to get that beginner's knowledge and to start understanding the fintech industry, what platforms do you believe provides that knowledge and has the most influence and reach when we're learning about the new trends in fintech?
I think Twitter, I'm a big fan of Twitter.
Okay.
Twitter, there's a lot of experts on Twitter, not only in fintech, on anything. And if you have enough time, the good ones, they share great insights, and you learn by immerse in this community, by reading the stuff, and reading is part of it. Doing is the second thing,
Okay.
But you can learn a lot from those Twitter influencers or experts, you name it, LinkedIn as well. But I think Twitter is probably the platform to find a lot of good stuff on fintech, AI, machine learning, on everything.
Perfect.
That's just part of it, then it's really doing, I think.
Getting yourself dirty, writing them.
It's like you can read a lot, but you have to do it. And that means also painful moments, failures, etc. But I think if you just read, it's not good enough.
Perfect.
Reading is just part of like breathing. It's just, if you don't work and you have time for that, do it. Perfect. There's no magic bullet. There's a lot of, it's like baking a cake. There are a lot of ingredients to become successful.
Okay.
Twitter and the insights you get there on fintech AI, it's just one ingredient, but there are many ingredients.
Perfect.
It makes sense.
That makes total sense. It's good to learn the theoretical and the foundations, but at the end of the day, you just need to get yourself into the field, start trying out your ideas, and see what works and what doesn't work.
And also building a good team, because this is not MBA talk. That's like all successful startups have great teams, because everyone brings different elements to the table, different strengths, expertise, and together you're really strong. I mean, I think we're not an island, and this is not management talk. It's like the better the team, the more likely you will succeed.
Perfect. So then I want to kind of move into traditional methods of banking and payments. In some nations, the banks hold a lot of power over financial systems. Do we see the rise of fintech being something that's going to threaten the dominance and the monopoly that banking systems have? Or do you think it's something that we see potential for integration? Or do we think of these two as two siloed institutions working apart from each other?
I think they all coexist. They work together. We see everything now, because there are more players now. It's not only the fintechs, it's the tech giants who they don't go into banking directly, but they take pieces of the business where they can, where they bring value to the customer. Then you have embedded finance, basically non-financial companies that provide the customer base usually big ones, with financial services. Walmart, the biggest retailer in the world, is has set up already its own fintech company to provide some services for the customers. So I believe look at the financial services from banks to fintechs, tech giants, embedded finance companies, companies basically that non-financial companies that but go into the financial space partially. It's like one big cake, and it's just shared differently. I think for banks, obviously they have the customer base, the capitalization, they have a lot of things going for them, the trust. But a lot of people still rather put their money with a big bank, the salary slip, but that will change. I remember when Amazon started or the internet started, it was difficult for people to imagine to pay with credit card and buy things. Now you don't even think twice about it. It's just, so, but I think to be fair to banks, I think some banks understand the threat of change, have a cushion to survive longer than startups, but it's like the Wild West. That's a wrong expression, I guess, but I think it's like there are different players in the same market. There's not this, because some people work together. I mean, some of these companies, it's not like the ones who can do it themselves. There are B2B players who really need incumbents to serve them, to provide them with better services. So at the beginning, it was all a hype. So at the beginning, I think, as we mentioned with AI, everything was hyped to like as a standalone. FinTech will replace everything.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's more like there's some players that can do it themselves. Some players want to work with incumbents, and in the end, the one thing that's what happened is the cake for banks has that piece of the cake has become smaller and smaller, but it's still big.
Right.
But it's getting small, and they know it.
Right. And I think banks are resilient and they'll find ways to adapt, right? With the coming changes.
To a certain extent, yes, the smart ones will, and we will find out at the end,
Yeah, perfect.
But banks will be around for a while, and the big banks anyway. But there will be new players around, and I think it's good. Competition is good for consumers.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's good for competition. It inspires more and keeps everybody nimble on their toes.
And even if some of them fail, a lot of them fail. As we know, startups, 90%, like rule of thumb, fail. But then there's always new kids on the block that will say, hey, let's learn from these mistakes, or let's do it differently. I think you can't stop this trend. It's here to stay. And there are some huge players around.
Perfect. Speaking of big players, I want to also talk a little bit about Bitcoin and its role with fintech, especially because more and more nations are starting to focus on having a cryptocurrency policy for their country. How do you feel, and what do you think Bitcoin has a role in fintech, and how those two will be intertwined together?
I mean, fintech is part of Bitcoin as crypto, and obviously blockchain as the enabler. That's fintech, and Bitcoin, crypto in general, Ether, and other cryptocurrencies. They're here to stay. Not all of them, but I think a few of them are here to stay, and more people will buy crypto. And of course, for speculation, for whatever reason. But it's I think it's that's a blockchain solution that had a mass adoption, and blockchain is coming as well now, but for other use cases, good use cases. But crypto is here to stay, and it's out there. I'm a big believer in crypto, but I don't make prediction where it's going to go. It can go to 100K likely, but it can go much higher. I mean, it's like because the more institutional investors come in, more retail investors come in, and then. But I think like I come from the hedge fund business. Like if you ever jump into a cab and the cab driver says something about Bitcoin, then maybe you have to sell at the moment. But we're not there yet. But it's much easier to buy Bitcoin or crypto in general. So I think it will stay volatile. I will not put all your money in there, but it's worth to put some money into crypto.
Okay,
I believe
that's good advice.
if you can afford to lose it.
Yes. Okay, that's good advice. I also wanted to talk a little bit about as fintech takes more dominance as payment methods, do you see government intervention, government regulation of these startups just to maintain privacy, data security, to ensure that fraud isn't happening? Or do you consider this to be very much to be in the private corporation realm where people must have their trust in the company to do the regulation for them?
No, fintech companies are very regulated. They're regulated like banks. And maybe if they're less regulated because they don't do all the same things as banks do. But if they do the same, if they provide the same services, they're under the same regulation as banks are. So sometimes it seems like they're less regulated, but they're regulated because it's in the interest of the fintech companies to be regulated, because it provides a safety net for their customers and trust. And regulation is not bad. I think innovation and regulation go hand in hand. And if you want to build trust, you also have to have regulations, because then that gives you the comfort to know that there's some laws in place to protect me, to protect my money, and to make sure that some processes are done correctly within this company you invest money or whatever.
Okay. So how would you measure the success of a fintech company? I know that might be another $1 million question, but
No, I think I always look myself at the traction.
okay.
And how quickly do they gain customers, paying customers in one way or another, either. And I think traction is the first thing I look at, because it shows you everything. It shows you that customers, you have an idea and people love it or don't. And if you see a huge traction, it means, oh, maybe they're on something good.
Okay.
I think. And to be profitable or not, that's not the key. I mean, obviously, the bigger they get, it's better if they get profitable soon, cash flow break even. But growth, traction, customer growth, or whatever growth they have, but it's a growth. That sounds so simple, but it's hard to achieve.
Makes sense. Okay, so to kind of wrap things up, I want to get your thoughts on what fintech companies do you think that we should be keeping an eye out for in the upcoming years for our viewers?
Oh, that would be a very hard question. I think no, it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say.
Okay.
Honestly, not even if people, I could give you a name, but I would not like to. There's so many great companies. I think we will still see new companies emerge. I can say this, that will shake the market. It's like now we have the Stripes, we have the Robinhoods, Revolut, Wise. We have a lot of great companies. I have a Klarna. They're all great companies in their space, but I believe there will be other companies coming in their space as well and shake it up. Like they shook up the incumbents. Eventually, they will become incumbents, and other players will come with newer technologies, new ideas. I think we picked up only the low-hanging fruits in the business. Things that incumbents should have done. Those great startups did it. Keep doing it. But the newer ones will say the same thing. Will say, oh my God, this great fintech company did it so perfectly, but I think I can do it better. And if they can do it better, they will take market share from that company. And so I think there's always somebody else coming after.
because of the rapidly evolving nature of technology and how fast it's progressing. I guess,
Doesn't mean easier because it seems like everything has been done.
right, exactly.
Oh, it seems like, but it's always the case, like there will be a different Google, as much as we don't believe that Google will be replaced as a search engines, but it will be replaced because the other good players coming up with, better algorithms, as crazy as it sounds. And then, of course, then you have different gatekeepers. For instance, if you would search through, an earpiece, then it could go to anywhere, to another search provider. It's like, and before Google, there were other ones, Yahoo, AOL. There were always other ones before, and at the moment you thought nobody can replace them. There was MySpace and Facebook came, but things evolve. And as dominant as those players are, and they did a lot of great stuff. I mean, I believe all those tech giants, sometimes we want to regulate them more, but on the other hand, they provided services we could never have imagined.
That is very true.
And enabled us to become more productive, more knowledgeable. So
it also connected us as a community.
Yes. And but I believe other players will come and replace them. But that's to predict who it will be. It's kind of impossible. It's like we will, once we see it, we know it.
Okay, that's actually great advice.
No, and so just follow your dream. I mean, all successful people. I mean, you have to follow your dreams, and it's going to be a lot of setbacks. And if you know that, and you can survive, it's like getting up again. If you're knocked down in a boxing match, you only lose if you don't get up again.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah, it's not mine, but it's so true.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Spiros. This was a very informative session today. You really got into different topics of fintech, and you gave a lot of advice for aspiring entrepreneurs who want to get themselves into this field. So I really appreciate your time for having this podcast with me today.
It was my pleasure again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.